Good day to you, Guyana, and welcome to another edition of Facing the Nation. I'm Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us this week. For those of you who follow me on social media, you would have known that earlier I advised that we would have been dealing with two issues on Facing the Nation today. Of course, that has to do with the M&CC's work regarding getting expired goods off of the market, and then we had promised you that in the second half today we would be dealing with the gaming sector. Unfortunately, we're only going to be dealing with M&CC and those efforts to get those expired goods off of the market. We're going to have to return to the gaming sector, meaning the Guyana Gaming Authority. We'll try to have the CEO next week, but unfortunately he had to cancel this week. But let's get right into today's program, and it's my pleasure to welcome for the first time to this program two young ladies. First of all, the Chief Meat and Food Inspector, Miss Onica Alleyne-Blackman. Welcome to Facing the Nation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you very much.
All right, you are very welcome. And the Deputy Chief Meat and Food Inspector, Miss Abiola Baker. Welcome to Facing the Nation to you
Thank
too.
you for having us.
All right, it's so fabulous to have you. And viewers, I thought it interesting for us to discuss this because, again, most times we only focus on certain issues when things happen. Normally, we've gone into the habit when we hear M&CC, Mayor and City Council, we think about only about bashing them for the piling up of garbage, which they have gotten under control. We forget that it's much more than that, and I'm happy to have these two ladies here to talk about something that we saw in blaring headlines recently, the fact that the M&CC is doing some work to deal with vendors who are still selling expired goods to persons. Ladies, first of all, let's talk about that operation. I understand it was a recent operation whereby you visit. Is it one specific area you visited to get expired goods off of the market, and what would have led to that?
Well, basically what happens is that we found that that particular area is prone to doing that. So that area was specifically targeted
Which
because
area?
of that, the Starbrook Bazaar.
Okay.
So that was a particular area that was targeted, for instance. So that is what the exercise was basically to check and seize all expired goods that were found at the said time. So in conducting that operation, we had the team of officers. We had basically myself, Ms. Baker, and other senior officers, and other officers from the Public Health Department.
Okay.
We've decided to just scoop the market and check these stalls, check the various stands, and see what is going on. The exercise was basically to check dates, to see whether they were expired, to check the goods in the whole, to see the manner in which they were being kept and sold, because through the bazaar sometimes you have the sun, the items are exposed to sun and other conditions, and basically storage conditions also. We wanted to see how that had affected the items, because it's not just expired. Sometimes some items are not even expired, but the manner in which they're stored would warrant for them to be disposed of.
All right. How would you advise citizens, a customer, to deal with that? For example, I may go to buy something, and you did just talk about the way in which they stored, and you can see sometimes the packet is, wrinkled and torn. How would you advise consumers to deal with that? Because I may go to a vendor and say, okay, let me have this, and I argue, well, look, it doesn't look presentable enough to me. But then when the vendor checks the expiry date and it's not expired, how as a consumer do you deal with that?
Well, as I said, basically it's not just about the expiry date. You have to look at the product. If the product is discolored but the expiry date is not met, I would not want to purchase the item because it doesn't look the way it should. So consumers need to shop with their eyes, and you're looking for these items, you're looking to see these kind of things. If the package is torn, it means that whatever inside can be compromised because the package is sealed for safety. So there's no way you would want to purchase an item where the seal might have been broken. Even with medications and so forth, they warn you that if the seal has been tampered, that you're not to purchase the items. Same for these items. You'd want to ensure that everything is intact, as well as the date.
Okay, all right. Let me bring the deputy in on the conversation here, and of course you can also comment. I've read too in one of the articles that covered that exercise that there have been cases where people, the vendors, some of them, and vendors, mind you, this is not an attack on you, this is just to keep our people safe, but there are instances where they seem to have changed expiry date.
Yes, that happens all the time. You know,
Wow.
people tamper with seals and date markings, whereby they use, I don't know if it's mentholated spirits and other chemicals to
Wow.
remove the date marking and to have them restamped. In some cases, they remove it and there's no date marking at all, right? And that's a contravention to our bylaws. So we do not want persons to purchase any items without date markings, expiry date. If the safety is compromised, you have dented tins, rusted tins, packaged without unlabeled items and all these things, consumers are not to purchase those items.
What about, because sometimes you see on the markets too items there the language you is not it's not necessarily Spanish. It may be or French. It may be a language that we're not necessarily familiar with. Any advice on those goods?
Yes, it is by law that every item entering this country should have the language of this country. Person should be able to read, to know what the ingredients are, the proportion of the ingredients, the name of the product, what is the product. You cannot buy a product and you don't know what is in there. Or you purchase an item and you don't know what is there. You must have the language, the official language of that country, and every person that's purchasing that item should be able to read the language on it. Right? Even if you have a foreign language, you should have the other language there as well. Or some form of decoding on that item to ensure that persons are able to read and to know what is present in there.
Okay, great. Chief Inspector, you explained that it wasn't the M&CC only, it was a collaborative effort.
It was the M&CC,
Oh,
but
only,
the Public Health
but
Department.
Along with the Public Health Department?
It was a collaboration between the two sections,
Between
the
the-
Environmental Sanitation section and our Food Hygiene.
Okay, so is there a department at the M&CC where, let's say, I can come and say, look, this vendor is continuously, whether I'm a fellow vendor or a consumer, is there a department at M&CC where I can come and make a report?
Exactly, yes, so the Food Hygiene Department.
Okay.
We have an office at Orange Walk South Road, and we also operate from the abattoir
Okay.
location at Water Street, North Cummingsburg, yeah.
Oh,
So anytime anybody has any complaints with regards to anything of that nature, they can always contact us at those offices, or we have telephone numbers that they can get us on.
all right. Before I move off from the vendors, I mean, is this a one-off, a once and for this sort of exercise? Is it ongoing, or are there marked times for it?
It's going to be an ongoing exercise.
Okay. All right. The vendors who may actually want to toe the line, what sort of feedback you got from them? Are they willing to change?
Well, let's say that the feedback that we got this trip was more of a positive one, because we are more accustomed to them being more agitated and aggressive towards us coming to remove items.
Oh.
But persons seem to be more conscious of what's going on now in terms of food safety, and I'm thinking that that had an effect on the way in which because they voluntarily surrendered the items, and we got a chance to take them away. But they need to, this is from the practice.
From the practice, all right.
Yeah.
Viewers, if you're now tuning in, we're talking with the chief and the deputy chief and meat and food inspectors at the M&CC. Of course, those of you who are now joining, even if you missed a little part of this conversation, as you know, if you follow me on social media, you'll be able to get the entire conversation, a little later on in the day. But let's continue with the ladies, because I know I have to let them go very soon. Chief Meat and Food Inspector, are there specific conditions? And you did mention, you did talk about the abattoir, and again, I'll also eventually ask the deputy to jump in on this one. What should we as consumers be concerned with when it comes to inspecting meat before we purchase? I mean, these are things we should know, but this is like a refresher conversation. What are some of the things we should be looking for? And if there are specific seasons that we should look for these things, especially when it comes to purchasing meat?
Well, basically, when it comes to purchasing meat, you look at the general condition of the meat first. If the meat meat has to be inspected and stamped by our department once it comes into Georgetown and is to be sold. So the first thing that we always tell the consumers to look for is the stamp. But the stamp will not be covered in the entire carcass. So it's not possible that everybody that purchased meat would have a piece of the stamp in there on their meat. So,
Understood.
but from observations, persons would be able to know whether or not basis. So my advice would be for them to purchase from reputable sources.
Okay.
Right? If you purchase from places where you know for sure that, well, look, these persons are coming to ensure that the meat is being inspected and stamped before it goes to the marketplace, you're in good hands that way.
All right, great. Deputy, is there anything you'd like to add on this part
Yes,
of the
well,
conversation?
added to what Onica would have said, by purchasing from reputable sources, I think persons need to look at the conditions of the meat that they're purchasing, the way it is stored, the color of the meat itself, right? If it's left open, if it is being sold at ground level, if it is being sold out in the open at ambient temperature, as we see sometimes, persons are not to purchase those type of meat. They're at risk purchasing those meat because microorganisms and bacteria would have already started to grow within the meat once it had been left at ambient temperature. And then you have vectors, you have flies and all other things, dust and all kind of things blowing in the street. So you shouldn't purchase those items if they're exposed to the elements of the weather and other things.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Ladies, is it apart from your operations at the abattoir of itself, is it in terms of inspection, do vendors, any sort of vendors, wherever you're inspecting, do they know beforehand you are coming? Are they required to know? Or do you find your job is more effective if you just show up to see what's happening?
It's more effective if we just show up on spot.
And that works. So
Yes.
it's not a case where you'll be able to tell me when it's going to be the next and
No,
where
we won't
areas.
be able to do that.
But okay, but it's a spread. You eventually get to the parts that you have jurisdiction over. Obviously, you eventually get to all of those parts.
Yes, we will.
All right, ladies. Before I let you go, let's talk about it from the consumer side, and I'll give both of you an opportunity, beginning with you, Deputy. Apart from the meat, because you just touched on that. Generally, what are you asking citizens at this time as you continue with your work to ensure that, and then we can talk about some of the penalties. I think I forgot to talk about the penalties. What are the penalties in place for people who violate in terms of selling expired products? If you're at liberty to discuss, what are the penalties?
But presently, we're working on fines that we should implement because currently there are no fines in process right now, so we are working on
the fines. All right. Okay. Now, while you're working on that, again, give citizens an understanding, why it's important for them to look out for expired products and so on. Beginning with you, Deputy, and anything else that you'd like them to know at this point regarding your operations.
Well, I would like to add that we don't only check for expiry dates when we have campaigns. We always check for expiry dates. And in our daily operations, whenever we go there to inspect supermarkets, grocery, and any food places, we always check for expiry dates. That is one of our main mandate: expiry dates, conditions of the product and the items, how it is stored, how it is handled, and all these things. We check for all those things. But in terms of expiry products and the citizenry out there, I would like to say that persons need to be more vigilant in what they buy and not just look at the price and the cost of items, because a lot of times those things have a catch. When you go to the market and you pass there and you see they're selling 3 for 100 or 3 for 500, you know something is definitely wrong. You need to be more vigilant, and you need to open your eyes more and ensure that you see a date marking. You ensure that the product has not been compromised, and that is the reason for selling it cheap.
Okay.
Right? We don't have a problem if the expiry date have like a month or two and persons decide in order to get it off the market before the date. But once there's a date marking, you have to stick to it. If you use the product after that and anything should go wrong with you, we are not responsible for that. You have to purchase the product in due time before the expiry date. That is why it have a date marking.
I'm happy that you said in due time before an expiry date, because on that note, what would you want? And we've all heard this. I'm not sure if it's a myth or not. People say, oh, if the expiry date, let's say the expiry date is the 1st of July, and you buy it on the day before the 1st of July, and you figure, look, after the 1st of July, there are about 2 weeks left. What are your thoughts on, I know you're advising against it, but what are your thoughts on people who think there is a week after or 2 weeks that you can use these products?
There are no guarantees on the safety of that product after the expiry date. If you use the product, you're using it at your own risk.
Okay.
And if something should go wrong with you, you cannot come to us because you are the person who compromised your health and safety. And I would like to advocate again, do not purchase items. There's no 3 months and 4 months and 2 months use after. That is why a date was placed there. Because after that, there are no guarantees. Right? So I want the consumers out there, or I would like them to be more vigilant. Always look for your expiry date. Look for the condition. Don't let them tell you, man, the label came up or anything. The label is very important. Because some persons have allergy, you don't know what is in that tin. If it's a dented tin, a swollen tin, a torn package, some of the information is off, do not buy it. It means that it has been compromised, and it wouldn't do your body any good. You can also get sick, and you can even die from using that product. So do not use it in the first place. Don't purchase it. Go and purchase from reputable sources.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you so much. And to you now, Chief Inspector, I'll give you an opportunity. I know the deputy said most of it, but I'd just like to give you another opportunity, to talk to consumers, do's and don'ts and so on before I let you ladies go.
Well, one of the things what I would like to say, especially when it comes to confectionery items and so, because those items are usually being bought for small children.
Yes.
So parents shouldn't just think, as Ms. Abby was saying, to look and say that, well, it's at a cheaper cost and it's more economical for our pockets, because when you do that, you're compromising the health of the children. And remember, their immune systems is much weaker than ours. It's not as fully developed. And if you give them products that are unhealthy, they become ill.
Yes.
And you want to avoid that at all costs. We want the future of our country, our nation, to be strong, healthy, and vibrant. So at all times, we need to protect their health, right? So consumers, as they need to really pay attention, shop with their eyes. That's what I keep telling them. You need to shop with your eyes to ensure that you look at your products properly. You examine them. If you have to look, if there's not a date and you ask them to show you and they're telling you that that's a date, even if you're not certain, if they're showing you some numbers that looks like a date, if it doesn't say the expiry date, it could be a manufacturing date.
Yes.
And it doesn't give you a guide. That date does not mean that that's the expiry date. It has to show expiry date or best by date or so forth, and that's the date that you go by to know the shelf life of the product, right? So when persons are shopping, again, they shop with their eyes to ensure that they're looking for these things. You don't want rusted and dented tins because, as Ms. Baker said, it compromises the product within the tin. How does it compromise the product within the tin? For instance, some of those products, if, for instance, you might have organisms such as the Clostridium botulinum organism in those cans because of the process that it goes through.
To manufacture.
Right? Yes. So if, for instance, you see a tin that is bulging, it's bloated, it can't stand, and they're telling you, well, that's the reason why we're selling it at a cheaper price, because it fell and it's just like that, and it fell and it became like that. Now, you could be buying a can of poison, and one of the, if that, for instance, if that organism is present in that can, what you can find happening is that if you consume it in enough numbers, you can have complete paralysis of the system.
Wow.
And it can result in eventual death, because if you're having paralysis and you can't breathe, you can't do anything, your bodily functions, you'll cease to exist, right? So that's how serious a bulging tin can be. So persons have to be very cognizant of what they're doing when it comes to buying these items. Whether it's the tin, it must have its label, it must have the date markings, and the tin of itself must be in a clean, tidy condition, because sometimes when you look at some of the tins that where they're being stored, it's not rusted, it's not dented, it's full of dust, but then if it's dusty, microorganisms are everywhere, and it will be present in the dust also. So when you open the can, it will get into the product, especially if you do not clean it. And again, because small children have a way of putting everything to their mouths. Most time when you buy the confectionery items or so, they have to bite the bag or what have you or so forth. So you see, again, they're the ones that are at risk when they purchase these kind of items, because you carry it home, even to the gummies and so that they want to put in the plastic bags and all these things. you have to be very careful because no dates are on those bags to say whether the gummies, the wormies or so have expired. So why am I buying it and taking it home to the kids? Right? So it's all about safeguarding health.
Okay, thank you so very much, ladies. I don't think you've missed anything, but thank you so much for being on Facing Nation. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, you've missed a great discussion as usual. You can find it on social media before the end of the day. Of course, that is both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. This would have been a conversation with the Chief Meat and Food Inspector, Miss Onica Alleyne-Blackman, and also the Deputy Chief Meat and Food Inspector, Miss Abiola Baker. Again, thank you very much for being here, ladies.
You're welcome.
All right, this is Facing the Nation. We'll take a quick break. On the other side of the break, we have some other matters to discuss. Stay tuned. All right, thanks very much for staying with us here on Facing the Nation. It looks as though we're going to have a shorter program than usual, but we don't mind. At least we're on air and we get to give you the information that was really and truly very important to you. And I trust that you listen to those ladies very well and that you take most of what they say under advisement and you use those things, especially when you're going to shop. I know some people who know me personally, think at times I'm paranoid, but I have taken a position to even dump products, and again, some people know me very well when it comes to that. I dump products even a week before the expiry date, because you have to be very, very careful. As the lady said, you have to be very, very careful with what you put inside of your bodies. Remember, you are not around when these things are being manufactured. So even when, especially things that come in a can or in sealed plastics or whatever the case may be, so you're already going out on a limb by consuming these products. You don't necessarily know the conditions and all of that. There are some people who are walking around with allergies and you don't even know you're allergic to something. You just see there's a breakout or two and you figure, man, look, whatever, it will go away. But sometimes you're actually doing the body more harm than good. And that is with products that are good. So much less with products that are expired. So we need to be very, very careful, and I really want to thank those two ladies for coming, because again, these discussions, we don't have them until there is some sort of epidemic, something around, and people start falling ill, and then we start a big campaign, and we start all of the PSAs, the public service announcements, and we get all tied up and excited, and we go into panic mode, when at the end of the day it always goes back to what the older folks always said, that prevention is better than cure. So I'm really happy that the Mayor and City Council is taking on that path. And I did say earlier in the program, sometimes when we hear Mayor and City Council, all we think about, what they're doing to clear this drainage, or when they're going to pick up this garbage or what. But remember, it's a lot more, and I'm happy to see that they're on the ball and taking that aspect of our safety making it a priority. So again, those are just things for you to consider from today onward and work on them. People say I'm paranoid at times for the way I check expiry date. I can tell you nothing is wrong with being paranoid for when it comes to what you put inside of your body. So again, that was great of them. Some things are happening. I know some people in certain quarters are lacking information when it comes to what's happening with cabinet, government cabinet, and what's not. I can tell you those meetings are still being held. Some of you look forward to the post-cabinet press briefings. Of course, those are usually hosted by the Minister of State, the Honorable Joseph Harmon, and we haven't had those for about 2 or 3 weeks, but I can tell you the Minister of State himself would have been on work assignment in other parts of the world. He was out of the jurisdiction sometime last week, and he's out again this week. So those of you who usually look forward to the post-cabinet press briefings to get the information from there, he would have been out, but of course he'll be back soon. I know one of the things that he attended is a disaster risk management workshop that was sometime last week, and these are things that are very important for us to jump on and piggyback on and to be a part and to play a major role. Again, Guyana is a part of the world. Things are happening in our country whereby they can be disasters can just emerge, especially with what everyone is talking about now, because and this is not just talk, climate change really is real. So it is very important for us to play a part in anything that has to do with managing disaster risks. So he played a major part in that, and it is also important for us as a nation too, because we're talking green, we're talking environment, and I must say that I am proud to see on our local television stations there so many different PSAs promoting not only green but promoting how to protect our environment. Last evening, in about a short space of maybe about 15 or 20 minutes, I saw about 3 or 4 advertisements addressing smoking and why it's bad for your health, and the fact that secondhand smoke can affect, and there's so many things, and there's one particular one where the driver of a taxi was actually driving. He's driving his cab, and there were passengers in the vehicle, and he was smoking. And I'm happy that they use that as an example, because sometimes as a people we can be very disorderly and do those things, and we really and truly have no regard for people and how it affects people. So when we're talking about environment and the climate and taking care of our environment, it's not only about ensuring our trees are there and ensuring that the earth is clean and so on, but it's ensuring that us as human beings, we don't do things to destroy the environment. So I must say congratulations to all the government entities and even private citizens who have come on board and are trying to do every possible thing, trying to play your role and contribute to protecting and to some extent saving our environment. And on that note, it takes me to recent sentiments by our president, David Grange, who is also out of the jurisdiction, attending to government matters and government business. I'll read for you 2 releases on what he's been doing that came from the Ministry of the Presidency. First of all, Conservation International in supporting Guyana's green development. Conservation International is keen to support Guyana's Green State Development Strategy. This message was conveyed by the President of Conservation International, Dr. Jennifer Morris, during a meeting she held with President David Granger on the sidelines of the 6th Assembly of the Global Environmental Facility, which was held this week in Da Nang, Vietnam. So President Granger, for those of you who don't know, President Granger is in Vietnam, attending that meeting, all in the name of, again, strengthening and these meetings and so on are very good, because we can take the best practices from various countries across the world and use them here to help us to protect our own environment and contribute to our green state development strategy and so on. President Granger and the CI president, of course that's Dr. Morris, also discussed issues of renewable energy development, conservation protection of